January 6, 1944. The cold English air hung heavy over the 8th Air Force headquarters at High Wycombe. Inside, Major General Jimmy Doolittle stood in the office of Major General William Kepner, commander of the 8th Fighter Command. Behind Kepner's desk, a sign hung on the wall that every man in the building had seen and understood. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive. Doolittle read it twice, his jaw tightening. Then he turned slowly to Kepner and said, quiet but firm, "That sign needs to come down. It's wrong." Within hours, the sign was replaced with a new one. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. It was more than just a change in words. It was a revolution in thinking, one that would shatter the Luftwaffe, win the skies over Europe, and decide the fate of D-Day itself. The crisis that forced Doolittle's hand had been building for months. On October 14, 1943, nearly 300 American B-17 bombers roared toward Schweinfurt, deep inside Germany. Their target was vital, the ball-bearing plants that kept the German war machine running. The mission succeeded. The bombs hit their mark, but the cost was unbearable. 60 bombers never came home. 17 more were damaged beyond repair. 600 men, dead or missing, in a single afternoon. In those grim days, bomber crews faced odds so terrible that surviving a full 25-mission tour was almost impossible. During the worst of 1943, only 1 in 3 bomber crews made it through. Lieutenant Robert Morgan of the Memphis Belle wrote in his diary that night, "We are being slaughtered. The fighters turn back at the German border and we fly on alone into hell." The problem was painfully clear. American escort fighters, the P-38 Lightning and the P-47 Thunderbolt, couldn't fly far enough. They lacked the range to follow bombers deep into Germany. Over Schweinfurt, they had turned back 300 miles from the target, leaving the bombers to fight alone. Waiting for them were hundreds of German fighters, Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, trained in brutal, efficient tactics. They attacked head-on, firing 30-millimeter cannons and rockets that could rip a B-17 apart in a single burst. The sky became a slaughterhouse. By December 1943, General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the U.S. Army Air Forces, had seen enough. He issued a grim ultimatum. Unless the German Air Force is destroyed, Operation Overlord cannot proceed. The invasion of France, D-Day, depended on winning the skies. Either the Luftwaffe died or the Allied bombing campaign would. Then in November, a solution appeared. A sleek silver machine that looked more like a racer than a weapon. The North American P-51 Mustang, now fitted with a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. It could fly faster, higher, and farther than anything before it. With external fuel tanks, it could escort bombers to any target in Germany and back again. Captain Chuck Yeager would later say simply, "The P-51 is faster, climbs better, and turns tighter than anything the Germans have." This changes everything, but Doolittle knew range alone wouldn't win the war. The real question was, how should these new fighters be used? For years, escort doctrine had been defensive. Fighters flew tight around the bomber formations, staying close, visible guardians, with strict orders never to stray far. When German fighters attacked, the escorts would chase briefly, then return to their posts. It sounded logical, but in practice it meant American fighters were always reacting, never controlling the fight. The Germans chose the time and place. They could hit, kill, and vanish before the escorts even got close. The bombers were meat on the table. Jimmy Doolittle, newly appointed commander of the 8th Air Force, saw things differently. He wasn't a bomberman. He was a fighter pilot, a test pilot, an engineer, a tactician who understood air combat at its core. 2 years earlier, he had led the daring Tokyo Raid, the first American strike on Japan, earning the Medal of Honor. Now, with Arnold's trust and the fate of the air war on his shoulders, Doolittle prepared to overturn decades of doctrine. On his first full day in command, he issued his order. Fighters were no longer to fly defensively. They would not circle bombers like sheepdogs. They would range far ahead, 50 miles forward, 25 miles wide, hunting German aircraft wherever they gathered. When the bombers turned for home, the fighters wouldn't return with them. They dived to low altitude, strafing airfields, destroying planes on the ground, hitting trains, trucks, fuel depots, anything that moved. The goal was no longer just to protect bombers. The goal was to destroy the Luftwaffe itself. The reaction was explosive. Fighter pilots cheered. They had long wanted the freedom to hunt. "We are no longer shepherds," Colonel Don Blakeslee told his men. "We are wolves." But many bomber crews were horrified. "They're abandoning us," one navigator wrote. "We'll be slaughtered without them." To many, Doolittle's order looked like suicide. But Doolittle knew something they didn't. The best way to protect the bombers was to kill the enemy fighters before they could even take off. The first test came on January 29, 1944. Over 800 bombers headed toward Frankfurt, escorted by the new P-51 Mustangs of the 357th Fighter Group. As the bombers droned east, the Mustangs surged ahead, sweeping the skies. Near Bonn, they spotted 50 Messerschmitts climbing to intercept. The Germans never saw them coming. The Mustangs dove from the sun, their Merlin engines screaming. In 8 minutes, 13 German fighters fell from the sky. 2 Mustangs were damaged, but both made it home. Not a single bomber was lost to that formation. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. 3 weeks later came the ultimate test, Operation Argument, better known as Big Week. It was a trap. American planners knew the Luftwaffe couldn't ignore attacks on its aircraft factories, so they planned a series of raids designed to draw every German fighter into the air. On February 20th, 1944, more than 1,000 bombers took off from England and Italy, escorted by hundreds of fighters. The Germans threw everything they had, nearly 900 interceptors. The sky over central Germany turned into a storm of contrails, fire and falling wreckage. But this time, the Americans had the advantage. The Mustangs, Thunderbolts and Lightnings were everywhere, slashing through German formations, ambushing them as they formed up, strafing airfields as they tried to land. Major Heinz Beer, one of Germany's top aces, wrote in despair, "We shoot down bombers, but the fighters are everywhere. They attack us before we can climb, when we land, when we take off. There is no escape." For 5 brutal days, Big Week raged. The Americans lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters, heavy losses but sustainable. The Luftwaffe lost more than 350 aircraft, and far worse, nearly 100 of its most experienced pilots. These were veterans, leaders, instructors, men who could not be replaced. The new German pilots entering combat in 1944 often had less than 150 hours of flight time, barely enough to control their planes, let alone fight in them. American pilots, by contrast, trained for more than 450 hours before combat. Skill, experience and numbers, all were shifting toward the Allies. By March, the effects of Doolittle's doctrine were unmistakable. When 8th Air Force bombers struck Berlin on March 6th, the Luftwaffe threw everything it had into the defense. The result was a massacre. The Americans lost 69 bombers. The Germans lost twice as many fighters and nearly 70 of their best pilots. "Today," one German officer wrote, "I watched the fighter arm die. The Luftwaffe could still build planes, over 1,000 new fighters each month, but it couldn't produce pilots to fly them." The veterans were gone. The replacements died within weeks. Training hours dropped as low as 50. It was a death spiral. By April, the balance of power had completely reversed. The Luftwaffe that had terrorized Allied crews in 1943 was now a shadow of its former self. Its airfields were bombed daily, its fuel depots burned, and its pilots hunted even as they took off. On May 8, 1944, 900 American bombers crossed into Germany, escorted by 750 fighters. Not a single German plane rose to meet them. For the first time, the Luftwaffe had ceded the skies. General Adolf Galland, the once proud commander of Germany's fighter arm, reported grimly to Goering, "The fighter force is destroyed. We have aircraft, but we cannot fly them for lack of fuel and pilots. The Americans attack at will. 1 month later, on June 6th, the proof of Doolittle's gamble filled the skies over Normandy. 14,000 Allied sorties blanketed the invasion beaches. German fighters managed fewer than 300. Field Marshal Rommel wrote to his wife, "The enemy has complete air superiority. Our troops cannot move in daylight without being attacked. The war is lost. What had once seemed reckless now looked like genius." Between January and June 1944, the Luftwaffe lost more than 2,500 fighter pilots, 3/4 of its strength. The average German pilot's experience dropped from 200 combat hours to less than 50. American fighters achieved kill ratios of more than 4-1. By year's end, the Luftwaffe was a hollow shell. Doolittle's decision had done exactly what Arnold demanded. It destroyed the German Air Force as an effective fighting force before D-Day. The bombers that once flew into hell now crossed Europe with minimal losses. But the cost was immense. More than 26,000 American airmen died in the skies over Europe, more than the entire U.S. Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. Yet their sacrifice secured a freedom no army could have won without them. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, one of America's top aces, said later, "We talk about tactics and numbers, but really it came down to thousands of young men flying into combat every day, knowing many wouldn't come back. We won because we attacked." Doolittle taught us that. By August 1944, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. Germany still built planes, tens of thousands of them, but lacked the pilots, the fuel, and the will to use them. Even the revolutionary Me-262 jet came too late. The pilots who might have used them had been killed that spring. "We had aircraft in abundance," one surviving German ace later said, "but no one left to fly them." History remembers that quiet moment in January 1944, the day Jimmy Doolittle ordered a sign taken down from an office wall as the turning point of the air war. A simple change in doctrine, a few words on a wall, transformed the course of World War II. When asked years later if he ever doubted his decision, Doolittle replied, "Changing the fighter tactics was the hardest thing I did. People thought it was madness, but you can't win a war by defending. You win by attacking." Today, both signs, the original and its replacement, hang side by side in the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. Together, they tell a story written in courage, sacrifice, and vision. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy enemy fighters. It was a lesson paid for in blood, but it gave the Allies the skies and ultimately victory in Europe.